Welcome to Image Builders Presents Conversation with Michael Carson. I'm your host, Michael Carson. Thank you once again for tuning in to the show tonight. We're so glad that you chose to spend some time with us tonight, and I appreciate it. If you're watching the show via Facebook, make sure you click that share button and the like button as well. If you're watching the show from YouTube, make sure you click that subscribe button as well as that bell so you'll be notified when we are on the air. Also, make sure that you use the hashtag Image Builders. That's IMAGEBUILDRS, and the hashtag Empowerment, EMPOWER, capital, all uppercase MEN. So that's Empowerment and the hashtag Image Builders. Well, tonight, my special guest is none other than Mr. Charles Clark. Mr. Charles Clark is, let me get his title right. He is the National Committee Engagement Coordinator for the AFL-CIO. Thank you so much, Mr. Clark, for joining me, and welcome to a Conversation with Michael Carson. How are you this evening?
Oh, supernatural, and thank you for having me.
I like that. I like that supernatural. So I know, and based on your bio, I know I'm talking to a godly man, a man who's loves God and loves the Lord, and also has some credentials to back that up. So you and I met here in Atlanta. It was during the March for Voting Rights Act, and we hit it off with just a quick conversation. I'm like, I need to know this man. One, because we don't live too far from each other, which I did not know. So I had to have you on the show, and I'm so grateful and honored to have you on the show tonight, because I think the work that you're doing, the ministry and the work that you're doing is so important. And I wanted to gauge and let the public know what you're doing, and also for you to bring us information and educate us on some things as well. So tell us, who is Charles Clark Sr.? Tell us a little bit about who you are, and let the audience know, a little bit about your journey.
Well, thank you, and again, thank you for this opportunity to be on. That's a tough question, because typically when I'm asked that question, I associate it with what I do rather than who I am. And so, if I had to look at who I am, I'm a person who's committed to social justice, social and economic justice. Grew up in a small town in Arkansas, on one side of the tracks where the town was just racially divided,
Mm.
and saw a lot of inequities, saw a lot of racism during my time. In fact, my grandmother cooked at a cafe, and I had to go to the back of the cafe in order to eat or to see her, as all of
Mm.
the black folks did during that time. So it was during that era that really sort of fertilized me for fighting for social and economic justice. Also, as you said earlier, man of faith. Uh, Actually, I've been a part of Church of God in Christ for the last 18 years, but
Mm.
also am a minister and co-pastor of two locations.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
I think I'm relational. I love to talk, but at the same time, I also am private.
Right,
I
right.
talk, but don't like to share everything.
Yeah,
I
I hear
feel
you.
like the less I talk, the more I'm able to learn from
Excellent,
people. So
excellent.
so I could probably go on and on about who I am, but I think
Well,
overall,
that's
I would like to say this though, because one of the
sure.
things I do is I work with faith-based organization in an effort
Okay,
to merge faith and labor together. Uh,
okay.
so here in Atlanta, for example, we have this faith and labor table that meets
Mhm.
constantly, and so we're forming one in Alabama, we form one in South Carolina, we're working in
Mhm.
Mississippi, and I like to think that I'm the embodiment of
Right.
faith and labor.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a good segue into one of the questions I was going to ask you. So I asked the question now. So, what is faith? How's faith playing a role with respect to labor? Because um, from what I've learned through reading and through studying history, it's through the church that a lot of organizing and things were done around issues relative to civil rights and the like. And we had a number of ministers who, Martin Luther King and others who were part of who supported labor. So talk about the intersection of faith and labor, and why that's so important, particularly in the Black community.
Well, as you said, throughout history, the church has stood on the right side of these issues. But
Mhm,
when you dig into the church, into
mhm,
the polity of the church doctrine is rooted in Jesus talking about the least of these, and how
mhm,
important it is for us to minister, to work, to advance, to support, to help the least of these.
mhm.
Matthew, the 25th chapter, talks about a parable where Jesus said, depart from me, I know you're not. And they asked,
Right.
Lord, why is it that we depart? He said, because when I was hungry, you didn't
Yep.
feed me. When I was in the hospital, you didn't come to see me. You didn't give me clothes. And
Mhm.
and sometimes the church folks take that scripture and don't quite expand it as
Right.
far as I think Jesus was saying. He
Mhm.
was saying, if you don't provide health care for folks
Yeah.
who need health care to go to the hospital,
Yeah.
or a living wage so that
Yeah.
folk can make a living. And so when you look at the church doctrine, and then you look at the mission of the labor movement, which is
Mhm.
to help the least of these. We don't have it in our mission, the least of these. We say to improve the working conditions of working families. And
Right.
so if you look at the two of those things, they actually intersect.
Yeah.
And so there is a role, because choir members are union members. A lot
Yeah.
of our members are deacons in the church.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, I run up on, particularly in the Black church, I run up on a lot of pastors who at one time were members of UAW, members of the
Okay.
steel workers.
Yeah.
So there is a connect and an intersect between the two, and I think collectively brings more power and leverage to make a change and a difference in our members' lives.
So the show tonight isn't about church and labor, but there is one other follow-up question I have for you with respect to that. And that is, how does that, do you find any challenges from, because a lot of church are businesses, which people don't realize that they operate as a business. They're 501c3 nonprofit entity, but in some of the larger churches operate as businesses, and even some of the smaller ones, they operate as businesses. And oftentimes there's a disconnect with what is volunteer work versus what should be actually paid, work and paid servitude. I mean, paid, wages for your experience and your expertise. So how has the church balanced out, some of the doctrine around, you know, the the business aspect and making money and so forth and so on with respect to labor and because they are a corporation, they are a company. So can you speak on that a little bit?
Well, I think the church has had a hard time with that. I think
Okay.
that's a tremendous challenge for a lot of pastors and a lot of church leaders who, one, are more interested in the profit
Right.
than they are the people.
Right.
And so it has been a challenge and continues to be. And so our mission has been to try and show church leaders the intersect, and the fact that it's more about the least of these than it's about
Mhm,
how much money you can put in your pocket. And
mhm,
Brother Carson, because of that, a lot of church leaders are very afraid to address issues that would divide the church
church.
community,
Yeah.
and particularly if they have big donors in
Yeah.
their church who are likely to be business owners or corporate America, or
Mhm,
groups that oppose that. And so rather than taking a issue or taking a
mhm.
stance on these, they're just set back. So we do have some challenges there, but on the other hand, there are those preachers, those
Yeah.
leaders who feel it's their mission,
Right.
and they'll step out to help. But that is a challenge.
Yeah, growing up, I didn't know, when you're young, you think you know, and you really don't know. And I used to always question the purpose of unions. It was like, why do we need a union? Why are you, my uncles, I had two uncles who are both deceased now. They were both union reps. And one of them sat me down because I had a hard time, and this was in my early 20s. I had a hard time understanding why they were striking for 10 cents, 10 cents extra an hour, why people were losing their job, and what was the important. And he sat me down and he explained the importance of unions and why it's important. And it wasn't just about the 10 cents extra an hour, but it was about really the quality of work and making sure the quality of life for the workers were also, taken care of. So after speaking with him and after speaking with his brother, who was also a union rep, I started to, and reading more and understanding more, I gained a appreciation for unions and what they mean and what they've meant. Talk a little bit about the AFL-CIO and why you felt it was important for you, because I looked at your bio and you were, part of a number of different unions. But why was it important for you to represent the AFL-CIO?
Well, I think for me, it was important to represent labor and to represent an
Mhm.
organization who fights for the dignity of workers. That's what it was
Mhm.
important. And along the way, I found myself starting with CWA,
Mhm.
who actually gave me the foundation, helped me to understand unions. And from there, I went to the AFL, who at that point, I was just searching for a place to go that would
Okay.
allow me to fight. And the
Okay.
AFL opened up that door. A sister who was regional director up in the Midwest, Mary Creighton, hired me, and that's how I got started. But in the interim, I had a couple of international unions to make offers to me in to work in certain areas that I thought was important. I've always
Mhm.
felt like part of my expertise was that of community coalition building. Always.
Okay.
I discovered a long time ago that if you say it long enough, folks start believing that you really are an expert in that
Right.
area. So I started
Right.
touting that in 1998, and one of the
Okay.
internationals wanted me to come to work to be the regional director for community engagement,
Mhm.
and and so I took that opportunity because I really love working in
Okay.
faith-based and community. So that's how I got to them. But one of them took me to DC,
Mhm.
and between 2012 and 2014, I got my feel of living up in the DC area where I had to park 5 or 6 blocks from the office and pay
Right.
astronomical parking fee.
Yeah.
And when I got an opportunity to come south again, the AFL called me and said, Please come back." And so I came back, and Brother Carson, that first week, I parked my car in my office, went
Yeah.
into the office and looked out the window, and my car was parked right there at my office.
Right.
That was a
Right.
good feeling.
Yeah, I'm
So
sure. It's some of the little things that we don't appreciate until we have to appreciate them.
that's true.
And I truly can understand that and relate to that. You describe yourself in your bio as a servant leader. What is it? Describe what that means. And I think you've already done that a little bit in our conversation thus far, but talk a little bit about servant leadership and how that's important for what you do, and what that means to you.
Well, if you study uh, Jesus' life,
Mhm.
then you know that Jesus was one who cared about the people,
Right.
and he put that above anything else. And so Jesus' whole premise was, how do you pick folks up? How do you support? How do you treat the least of these?
Mhm.
And that our whole mission in life is about the empowerment of others, not
Mhm.
us, but others. And so when I think of servant leader, I think of a person who is striving to put others in front to help our community to help my brother and sister,
Yeah.
even sometime at my own expense.
Yeah.
And that's what I see a servant leader as.
Yeah. I really appreciate that. And I can relate to that in a lot of ways. We'll have conversations about that at another time. But I want to switch gears a little bit. But for those of you that are joining us, you're here with Conversation with Michael Carson. I'm Michael Carson. I'm here with Mr. Charles Clark Sr., who's the National Community Engagement Coordinator for AFL-CIO, also a preacher, a teacher, if you've been listening thus far, and also a champion for human and civil rights and labor rights. So I'm pleased to have him on the show. I want to read a quote that I found when studying the AFL-CIO, and it says, racism is a part of our inheritance as Americans. Every city, every state, every region of this country has this deep history with racism, and so does the labor movement. And that was a quote from Richard Trumka, 2014, the Missouri AFL-CIO convention. Talk a little bit about the history of labor and racism. And you talked a little bit about, why you were drawn into it, but talk a little bit about labor, because everyone wasn't, Black folks weren't welcome in the union, for those of you that are watching the show. So how is the AFL-CIO and other labor type organizations and the labor movement dealt with racism?
Well, labor unions have certainly been on the forefront of, of attempting to address racism.
Mm-hmm.
And however, just like President Trumka said, and by the way, President Trumka had a heart attack, and he's not with us anymore, which was a shock. But as he said, you know, um, we've had our own share of it, and
Mm-hmm.
we've attempted to address it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not unlike any other area that you and
Right.
I have lived in and worked in.
Right.
There were places, I just said earlier, I couldn't go in the front door of the restaurant that my grandmother worked in.
Yeah.
That was a result of racism. So the labor movement has experienced it, and like
Mm-hmm.
all other groups, continue to experience, deal, and address it. And I think it's something that, as a staff, we've got to continue to try to improve on where we are.
Mm-hmm.
I would note that when President Trump said that in 2014,
Mm-hmm.
he was in St. Louis at the convention, but what had just happened was that Michael Brown had been killed, and
Okay. Yeah.
he was, and that whole city had erupted
Right.
during that time, and it just so happened the convention was
Yeah.
there also, and so it forced us, and that's what I've been finding, is that
Mm-hmm.
situations have forced us as a labor movement to address racism, each time differently, and hopefully each time we've advanced a little bit further.
Yeah.
Are we there? Nope. But is it my desire that we're gonna get closer? Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, with men like you at the helm and the work that you're doing, I'm sure we'll get there much sooner than anticipated. Let's talk a little bit about essential workers, because we found out during this pandemic how we kind of put a face on essential workers. Before they were, no one wanted to talk about it. There's a fight for 15. A lot of people fall in that category, from waiters and people providing services that we need. But the buzz and the rhetoric we hear on social media is that essential workers aren't providing quality service. So now it went from, we didn't want to pay them, till some companies were forced to pay people because they need the workers, to now the quality of the service, as well as the shrinker in the labor force, is causing some people to think negatively about essential workers and others. Talk a little bit about that, because there is supposedly a national labor shortage. And then it's usually, and for what I'm finding out, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's from individuals who are supposedly essential workers. So how do we balance fighting for the rights for essential workers, yet now the negativity that's coming from the quality of service and the fact that people don't want to come to work.
And Brother Carson, I always have to look at the source of the negative
Hmm.
comments.
Right.
Oftentimes, people groups who are asserting those have an agenda,
Hmm.
and so let me just say that what I found and what I see, and even from some of the articles I've read recently,
Hmm.
this lack of the quality of service has a lot to do uh, with corporations and companies and business who created that environment. Let me give you a case in point.
Okay.
Um, go to hotel,
Hmm.
and before the pandemic, they would clean your room every day,
Hmm.
and it's just part of what they do. Housekeepers come, clean your room every day, provide um, the, the linen.
Right.
Today, that doesn't happen.
Right.
Uh, they don't clean your room every day, and so what we found is that in a lot of those cases, those individuals, they have fewer staff, but they
Hmm.
have a heavier load,
Hmm.
and these housekeepers are attempting to clean um, a larger quantity of rooms than they had before, thereby not being able to give them the kind of time and attention that they gave before. We currently have a petition and a drive going on right now to try to force hotels to go back to cleaning rooms every day and
Hmm.
providing that. So I think that some of this I have some concerns about whether or not they're real, like this
Hmm.
national labor shortage. The reason for it, I think there are various reasons. Then, for example, people don't
Hmm.
want to work, but I think a lot of it has to do with corporate America, who's creating this sort of environment to advance their profit making agenda. That's that's
Yeah.
that's from my perspective.
Yeah, and I can appreciate that. I remember after 9/11, a lot of companies, there was a lot of layoffs, the financial markets and things were hit hard. And it seemed like companies figured out a way to get more with less.
Hmm.
And then they found that our profit margins were a lot greater with having, I'm in the legal profession, with having, you know, three staff to do the work of 10 staff members,
Right, right.
and yet they're billing at the same rate and expecting the same productivity, but they didn't increase. The pays. They didn't, give pay raises because they claimed they didn't have the money, but their profit margins were increasing. So I don't know if we're in the same space, because right now there's a lot of unrest within the labor movement. I mean, you have workers from John Deere and the like who are on strike, and you have others who are threatening the strike, and there's strikes throughout the entire country. How is the AFL-CIO approaching these different strikes? How are you guys supporting them, and what do you want us to know about these different strikes that are happening in different from healthcare to the auto industry, from it's all over.
That's
So,
true. You're right. We actually have categorized the month of October as Striketober,
oh, okay.
uh, because of the various strikes that are happening, as you just said. But
Yeah.
we also see it as an unrest w- created by workers who have determined that their priorities have changed. This
Okay.
pandemic has allowed priorities to change, and for workers now are saying, it's time for me to stand up and step up if I'm
Right.
going to have a higher quality of life and
Right.
provide for my family, and at least leave a legacy and some gumption to
Yeah.
my children. And
Yeah.
so they're standing up. And let me just say that, we did a survey, and 68 percent of workers
Hmm.
would join a union if they had a chance.
Chance. Yeah.
70, around 73% said that they believe that workers should have collective bargaining rights. Now,
Hmm.
that's absent using the word union.
Hmm.
And so, as you can see, 2/3 would join unions, and so we see this collective striking and activism as
Hmm.
a means of folks are stepping up, standing up, and want to be represented. And we actually think that it's a good thing because we want to embrace it, support it, so that
Hmm.
we can increase the leverage of power that workers have in the workplace.
Excellent. Before I go on to talk about the PRO Act, I know you were in a recent conference, recent labor conference. Is there anything you want the public to know, or anything you can share that we should pay attention to, or that we should know that came out? Any particular themes or any particular points that we should know about?
And I think the conference you were making reference to, I might not have attended that conference
Okay.
this past weekend.
Yeah.
No, I didn't get a chance to attend. I
Okay.
had some issues to come up.
Okay. So let's talk about the Pass the Pro Act. If you're watching the show, you'll see a ticker at the bottom, Pass the Pro Act, where want you to call your senator and then call that number on the screen to encourage your senator to support the Pro Act. So talk a little bit about what the Pro Act is, and besides calling, what else can we, what else can we do?
Well, the PRO Act is legislation that will strengthen workers' ability to protect themselves at the workplace. It
Mhm.
will allow workers the opportunity to organize into unions to give them more collective strength and have a voice in the workplace. The PRO Act is an acronym that means protecting the right to organize act.
Okay.
And I can tell you that it's a revolutionary piece of legislation that
Hmm.
would protect workers from getting fired for union activity,
Hmm.
provide penalties, for example,
Right.
to employers who violate the law. It prohibits what we call captive audience meetings.
Hmm.
In an organizing campaign, the employer will bring workers together involuntarily and have these fear, intimidation, captive meetings to try
Right.
to frighten them from organizing. And oftentimes they use little tactics uh, to get workers to be fearful. But this act will prohibit that. It
Hmm.
also prohibits the Jim Crow right to work laws,
Yeah.
where workers who are a part of a collective bargaining environment pay no dues, but yet reap the benefit of a
Mm.
union who negotiate wages, benefits, and working conditions. And so it would do away with that. And it's just a revolutionary piece of legislation that would put the power back into the hands of workers, which the 1935 National Labor Relations Act intended
Hmm.
it to do.
Hmm.
And so I will also say that this PRO Act has already passed the House.
Yeah.
And right now we have 50 senators who have committed to vote for it.
Okay.
The problem is the filibuster in
Yeah.
the Senate.
Yeah.
You got to have 60 votes, and that means getting 60 votes from a party who caters to corporation and
Corporations. Yeah.
big business, and they not having that. And so we are looking at a path that would allow the PRO Act to go in and get passed, uh, eliminating the filibuster on a
Okay.
majority vote. Now, let me also just say
Mm-hmm.
that the path of doing that right now
Mm-hmm.
is, we think, is these two um, infrastructure and reconciliation bills
Okay.
that President Biden had, the Build Back Better plan.
Better. Right. Right.
And we, because in those are things that will help the
Workers.
average workers.
Yep.
And so we certainly want to get that passed. And if that happens, then the Senate got to seriously look at whether or not we change the rules to pass that.
Yeah.
And if that happens, then there's a commitment that there are a couple of bills that will go in with that, and that is the voting rights
Yeah.
bill that's so important, and the PRO Act that we think is so important to all of us as workers. So that's the path.
Yeah. So how is this? Do you see this piece of legislation as the beginning of something to even make unions stronger, or do you see it as the middle game, or maybe the ending? Where do you see this piece of legislation being?
That's a good question. I see it as a beginning game.
Okay.
I see it as the start because the union density has been declining over the last couple of decades,
Mhm.
and the statistics have shown that as union density declines, so has the quality of living for workers, so
Yeah.
has the wages,
Yeah.
and so we believe that with this legislation passing, it provides an opportunity for more growth
Okay.
in being union, which if statisticians are right, then as the number of union members increase, so
Hmm.
does the standard of living, the wages start increasing as well. So I see it as a beginning uh,
Hmm.
game for us, and we got to also grow from here.
Do you guys, with this, just a couple of final questions, then I want to give you the last word. With this piece of legislation, do you see it as a way for you guys to hold unions more accountable, or to make unions to do a better job at being at organizing and providing a service, so that it can get the support from people who typically would never be in union? Like, I've never, in my profession, I've never been in a union. Not that I didn't want to be, but it's just not something that we have in this particular profession. So do you think this is also a way to help galvanize unions to be even better and provide even a better quality of service to their members?
I think the answer to that is yes.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's going to force us being the labor movement,
Mm-hmm.
to sit down and develop a strategic campaign of how we're going to do this, how we're going to educate people, because there has to be this coordination
Right.
between labor unions. Otherwise, we end up stepping on each other trying to organize workers. But it's going to force us to do that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we are not going to reap the kind of strength that we are anticipating. The foundation, the vehicle will be there
Mm-hmm.
to do it. But if you don't have folks who know how to drive, we're not
Right.
going anywhere.
Right. No, that's true. That's so true. Again, if you're watching the broadcast, make sure that you support the PRO Act. Call your senator, call your legislator, and make sure that they are aware that their vote matters and that you need their vote in order for this to get passed. Also, call the White House and tell them to use their bully pulpit to get rid of that filibuster so that we can get this passed and other important pieces of legislation. My final question to you tonight, and I thank you so much for being on the show, Mr. Clark, is this: in your bio, you say that your wife is your guardian angel. So I want you to give her a shout out, and I want you to tell the audience why she's your guardian angel.
Well, I met her at a time when I was dealing internally with a whole lot of issues and
Mhm.
struggles. I was traveling a lot in my work at that time, and really didn't get to do as much Bible study and get to church and in my profession, there are always different things that's going on at nighttime, or campaigns that you work on the weekend on Sundays. And so I met her at a time when I was really examining where I was spiritually.
Okay.
Did not know her. She was a uh, an employee of the Alabama State Employees Association,
Mhm.
and at the time my organization was trying to merge and build a relationship with them. So they sent me to DC, and her organization sent her to DC. And my job was to take care of her and two others. And I've been
Right.
taking care of ever since. And so I really call her my guardian angel because she helped me to get on track spiritually
Yeah.
and has been helping me to stay on track spiritually ever since. And so I give her a lot of kudos for that.
And her name is
Sharon Adams Clark.
Sharon Adams Clark. A wonderful name. It sounds like a wonderful person. Thank you again so much for being on the show. For those of you that are watching, again, support the PRO Act. Make sure that you call your senators. Make sure that you do all you can. This is an important piece of legislation. Make sure you also go out and support businesses and support workers. Give them some, give them some love, show them some love, and maybe have a little bit more patience during this time if the quality of service isn't the way what you expect. But just know that we're all in this together. And I thank you so much again for joining us. I'm going to hop over to the after show on Instagram, and me and Mr. Clark are going to spend a few minutes after the show chatting. But again, thank you for joining us on Conversations with Michael Carson. Thank you, Mr. Clark, for your time tonight. I really appreciate it for your work, your dedication, and your service, not only to the AFL-CIO, but to the community as a whole. We need more men like you doing what you do, and we appreciate you. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning into Conversations with Michael Carson. Join us here each Thursday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Time for engaging and insightful conversations. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you have not already done so, don't forget to click the share button on Facebook and the subscribe button on YouTube. The conversation doesn't stop here. Head over to Instagram and join us on Michael Carson Jr. starting shortly. See you soon, and until next time, continue blessings.